Hello, this is Steve with Pro Tools PC, and on this video I wanted to talk about Elevate. Elevate is a new plugin by Newfangled Audio and Eventide. It's a full-on dynamics mastering processor with the expected capabilities such as look-ahead limiting, a ceiling, dithering, transient shaper, clipping, multiband processing, etc. It has the ability to split the signal into a maximum of 26 frequency bands and have processing applied to each band individually to minimize any possible distortion and maximize the dynamic processing abilities. Newfangled Audio make a huge emphasis about this processor being as clean as possible when processing is applied. To start off with, I want to point out that most all settings will have some sort of a tooltip on them, which is really important in a plugin like this that has so many different things going on. Elevate has a full preset manager and comes with a decent amount of factory presets. It has a compare function. Info will pull up the user manual, which I highly recommend going over. And then settings here. Underneath settings, the meters for this and Equivocate run by OpenGL. So the problem there is if you don't have a dedicated graphics card, it can put a big hit on your CPU. So worst case scenario, you could just shut off your meters, and it won't shut off your input and output meters. It'll only shut off the metering and waveform displays in here. So it'll take that load off of your CPU. Another way to drop the load a little bit is to limit the amount of bands. So instead of having the full 26 bands, you could drop it down to say 10 bands and take that load off. And then next here with gain lock. Gain lock's really cool because what it will do is lock down the gain drive ceiling and the input and output levels. So when you go jumping presets, your volume levels won't be drastically shifting up and down and all over the place, blow your ears out, speakers out, anything like that. So that's a pretty useful feature if you're just kind of jumping around messing with stuff. And when you get kind of settled in on something, you can shut it off. And then also under settings here is dither. Then active and match level here are both really important. What active will do is it's basically like a bypass button, but the advantage with that is if you just use the bypass in Pro Tools, for instance, it'll kind of, that buffer time, it'll skip when it comes off a bypass, so this just eliminates that. And then what match level does is it actually boosts the level of the unprocessed signal. So when you go hitting active to shut it on and off, it will still keep your input and output levels similar, so you're not hearing that big jump in volume when you're wanting to listen to process and unprocessed. So this is definitely something that would be more workflow dependent, but I'm sure a lot of us are used to sitting there messing with the levels all the time when we are trying to compare processed and unprocessed, so it just eliminates that. Then here in the middle, this just gives us our view in the graph here. So we have an input relative to output. Then here, this is our gain reduction setting, and the lower frequencies are darker, and there's two views on this, so we can go to spread or stack waveforms. And then over here in filter bank is more like metering, so it's your input level next to your output level, and then your gain reduction actually comes down from the top in orange. And then over here we have the metering on each side. It is identical to Equivocate, so you have little ticks that'll represent peaks, solid bars that represent RMS. You have a peak hold represented up here, and then you have input level setting up here you can adjust. And now up here with the output level setting, we have two major settings. So we have manual, and when it's set to manual, it works just like the input. So you can just set the output level where you want it. And then you have automatic. At this point, auto, which its default is off. So when it's off, that's saying you can make the signal physically louder. There's no threshold there at the end, if you will. It'll just continue to push and make your output louder. So when you turn auto on, it will reduce the output level by the total amount of gain and drive added in the processing. So in most cases, if you're wanting to actually make the signal louder, you would keep it shut off. But otherwise, if you don't want that, you could just leave it on auto. And then down here for the meat of the plugin, the area that actually controls how we process the audio, there's two views. So we have our main parameters view, which is what we are looking at now, and then we have our submodules view. And you can think of the submodules view as just the settings that actually control what these faders are doing, if you will. So you can come down here and kind of look at them a bit. And then over here we start off with the amount of bands that we want to have for processing. And then over here we have our limiter setting. So we have limiter gain, which you just kind of think about like a threshold. And then we have a speed, which is kind of like an attack release combo. And then obviously a ceiling. We know what the ceiling is, that, we don't want the signal to go above this certain level. And if we want to, we can turn the limiter completely on and off over here if we want to. The transient emphasis allows some of the transients that were squashed in the limiting stage to be added back. So typically this works best with fast transients such as drums, and then the slider runs from clean to full out emphasized here at 100%. I'll just point out it's really cool what it can do with drums. So you can actually limit the signal quite hard. And then if you want to, you can come back and push your kick and snare, for instance, back out of that mix some. So it's a pretty cool feature. So at the end over here is the Spectral Clipper. Clipper gives you a way to clip or distort transients. It can make a mix perceived louder than what it actually is, and can help you push levels to and minimize the pumping effect. Now, the one thing I have skipped over is the adaptive settings here at the bottom. This is kind of where the power lies. The adaptive is the ability for each band here to be processed individually. So you can actually turn that on or off. So if you want it to work as a whole, limit the whole signal together and not each band individually, you can control that here. So if you turn it all the way up, in this case, it would limit each band individually. And then if I turn it down, it would basically limit it as a whole file and not on a per band basis. And then over here on adaptive speed, it's the same thing. So at 100%, each band is doing its processing individually. Whereas if you turn it down to 0, it's just the opposite, and it's just treating the whole file as a single band. And then here under the submodules, for the filter bank, I would say probably watch the video on Equivocate, where I go over this a bit more in detail, as it takes a decent amount of time to run through it and explain it. But you can adjust your frequency centers here if you like. And then above, you can solo bands, hit shift to solo multiple bands. If you drop down here right beside, you can see a plus and a minus where you can delete or you can add bands. And then with Mel and Custom, Mel gives you equal spacing between bands, and the minute you go adjusting any of them, it'll switch to Custom. And then here under limiter EQ, I guess you could kind of think about this as more of a dynamic equalizer if you want to, but you can actually now adjust the levels for those bands that you was able to adjust your frequency centers over here. And then now you can adjust the level on them. And then once again, as I mentioned earlier, the adaptive gain setting. So each band can run individually, or if you want it to run kind of as all as a whole. And then here with transient emphasis, I kind of give the definition of what it does earlier, but this is the same situation. As you can see here under adaptive on this submodule view, it'll show single band or multi-band. So you can kind of emphasize the frequencies that you want to the frequency of the transients that you want to let through. So if you want to try to push, say, the snare more than you want the kick, anything like that, you can adjust and work on all of that here. And just like all the other windows, you have solos per band, resets. You can, draw curves if you want to, anything like that. And then our Clipper submodule. So with the Clipper submodule, it just kind of gives us the shape of the clipping we want to use. And then we can go over here if we want soft clipping where it's real smooth, or if we want really more distorted hard clipping. So this video ended up being longer than what I had planned. This plugin just contains so many features and abilities, it was kind of daunting to tackle them all. It took me a bit of time to get my head wrapped around it and make sense of it enough to even start using it. I am finding it quite useful though. The metering and simple ability to view the input versus output dynamics is wonderful. The match level function I'm really starting to like a lot. And it can really... Just those features alone can really speed up a workflow before any processing is even started. It does contain obviously more like a dynamic EQ ability, but not really a formal EQ as it's more of a dynamics processor, but that is where Equivocate comes in. I'm not really used to having to read a manual either before using a plugin, but in this case it felt pretty well necessary. Now bear in mind it does have almost 5,000 samples of latency at 48K, so it's obviously, which I don't think anyone would plan on it, but it's obviously not something you'd be used with tracking or inserting on a bunch of tracks or something like that. I'm definitely looking forward to spending some more time on it and, being able to make some more informed judgments of it, but I'm definitely looking forward to implementing it more in my workflow. Thanks for watching the video, and any questions or comments, hit us up on our website. Thank you.